Hello and welcome to the Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Over the next 60 minutes, I'll be bringing some of the very best interviews and reports this week. And talking about this week, we'll report on the design of the Paralympics.
Keeping this consistency in branding ensures a continuity of graphic identity on backgrounds, which is very important for viewers tuning in from around the world.
Plus, Eurovision heads to Basel.
This is really a chance for the country to perhaps change the narrative that it's a bit of a sleepy place, but also it already did that with Nemo's win this year.
All that and much more in the next hour, here on The Curator with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. We start the show with the Foreign Desk Explainer this week, and this time Andrew Muller explains why the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah seems to have peaked and promptly fizzled out over the weekend.
When is a war not a war, or at least not quite? At the risk of tempting fate, always a necessary qualifier to any discussion of the Middle East, we may have seen an answer to that question earlier this week in the latest exchanges between Israel and the Lebanese militia Hezbollah. The facts as we understand them are broadly these. Early on Sunday morning, Israel launched a major air operation against Hezbollah, sending perhaps 100 fighter jets to hit Hezbollah rocket launcher sites across southern Lebanon.
A short while ago, the IDF identified Hezbollah terrorist organization preparing to fire missiles, rockets towards Israeli territory.
The intention, according to Israel, was to preempt an anticipated barrage from Hezbollah. Hezbollah's long-threatened retaliation for Israel's assassination last month in Beirut of senior Hezbollah military commander Fuad Shukr. About an hour after the Israeli raids, the barrage, or a possibly reduced version of the barrage, came anyway. Hezbollah launched around 300 rockets and drones at Israel. This was very much not the first exchange of fire between Israel and Hezbollah since Hamas attacked Israel last October 7th, but it was the biggest. Nevertheless, if we take at face value the battle damage assessments offered by both sides, remarkably little damage was done. Israel says that no Hezbollah missile struck what Hezbollah claimed was their primary targets: the Glilot military base near Tel Aviv, home to the Israel Defense Forces Unit 8200, an intelligence unit, and the Ein Shmer Air Force Base near Hadera. Israel did announce the death of one Navy sailor aboard a patrol boat and injuries to two others, caused by shrapnel from one of Israel's own Iron Dome air defense missiles, which struck a Hezbollah drone near the craft. A few injuries were reported elsewhere. Hezbollah says that Israel's claims to have wiped out thousands of rocket launchers were overblown, admitting the loss of only a few dozen such contraptions and the deaths of 4 fighters. It is probably as well at this point to acknowledge one of the immutable laws of any active conflict. All parties to it are, to some extent or another, lying, denying, occluding or deflecting. There is no reason why they wouldn't. Information is a weapon, and a weapon with considerable power to befuddle one's opponents and rally one's allies. All reports from both sides of Israel's operations on the West Bank this week should also be viewed through this filter. But in the specific instance of the weekend's back and forth, we can probably go ahead and assume that while some details may have been fudged, there is a broadish representation of reality in what both sides have said about these exchanges. Israel, for example, could not easily style out a direct hit by one of Hezbollah's Katyusha rockets on a military installation which is, and I checked, a 20-minute walk from the nearest McDonald's. So it all appears to amount to a great deal of military effort and expense for not much result in both directions. This is, of course, good news in both directions. Since October 7th last year, more than enough people have been killed, injured, displaced, bereaved and or traumatized in Israel, Gaza, the West Bank and Lebanon. If a greater proportion of recent military actions had been this variety of largely consequence-free pyrotechnics, the Middle East would be a happier place. If it seems counterintuitive that such major assaults could do so little harm, it may seem downright inexplicable that all concerned should sound pretty satisfied with the result. Hezbollah Secretary-General Hassan Nasrallah seemed happy to call it a draw, saying in effect that he believed that the Fuad Shukr account was now settled and that Lebanon's people could, quote, take a breath and relax. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu huffed and puffed somewhat, but as of this recording, that's about it. Interestingly, amid the hurly-burly of Israeli politics, he currently looks like something of a moderate, fielding criticism from right and left for not hitting Hezbollah hard enough. So what, the reasonable listener may well be wondering, was the point of all that? Well, weird though it sounds and grotesque though it may be, war often has a theatrical aspect. Sometimes an action is undertaken not to kill or destroy, merely to demonstrate that you are able and willing to do so if further provoked. An example from very recent history. Back in April, Iran launched a colossal wave of assorted projectiles at Israel in retaliation for an Israeli strike on Iran's diplomatic compound in Damascus. Almost all of Iran's airborne armada was intercepted by Israel and its allies, as Iran surely knew it would be. Iran felt that it had to be seen to do something, but did not want to do anything that might overly antagonize a foe which, rightly or wrongly, it is what it is, has always observed a doctrine of massive retaliation to meaningful threat. Hezbollah similarly does not want an all-out war with Israel, on the basis that it would do Hezbollah no imaginable good. There are several important differences between Hezbollah and Hamas, but the most crucial is that Hezbollah are not crazy. Nasrallah and his deputy, Naim Qassem, with whom this correspondent spent an agreeable enough afternoon in Beirut back in 2001, have not lasted and prospered this long by not knowing when to stop pushing their luck. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller.
And let's head back to Paris. The Paralympic Games started this week. Monocle's Maylie Evans spoke with the creative team at W. Conran Design on how they forged the Games' visual identity and how their icons have made history.
This year's Paralympic Games invites over 4,000 elite athletes with disabilities from around the world to compete in 549 medal events. Starting 2 weeks after the Olympics, one of the event's challenges is to continue momentum. And one way to do this is through design. This year, both the Olympics and Paralympics are unified, sharing a consistent visual identity that carries across both games. I caught up with some of the team at the studio W. Conran Design to find out more. We first hear from Jean-Jacques Charret, the company's creative director.
We developed a brand visual identity for both. The idea was not to differentiate them, but to say that they have the same rage to win gold.
A central part to W. Conran's branding is their take on pictograms. These are the icons used to represent a sport graphically, a universal language of sorts, implemented during the Games on signage as a means for tourists to find their way to respective arenas and venues. Pictograms arrived at the Tokyo Games of 1964 and have become a staple of the Olympics. But this year, the Paris 2024 committee called for something a little different.
There was a big challenge around pictograms to unify Olympics and Paralympics, so it was very challenging for us. There was this idea of putting the pictograms in a new dimension. It's not about signage anymore, it's more about pride.
Rather than pictograms that focus on the body, and often the male one at that, these icons take their cue from heraldry, focusing on the apparatus involved with each sport. The design team created a coat of arms for each event, as Chloe Thomas, branding deputy general manager at W. Conran Design, explains.
It's the first time it's like gender neutral, because if you have a look at the design of previous pictogram, it's more masculine. So right now we are just gender neutral and we put sport at the heart of everything.
And it's many of these designs that are carried straight across from the Olympics right through to their Paralympic sibling.
We started the work with this philosophy. How can we wear our own pictograms to say that we are proud of sports? That's why we decided to create those which are very linked to the sports assets and not about the differences of ability or disability. It was more iconic of the passion of sports.
Though there were ambitions to have identical coats of arms across all sports, in some instances this proved rather difficult.
Our first ambition was to have a common pictogram for Olympic and Paralympic, and sometimes we didn't succeed to do that because of specific assets that are not common for both competitions. For instance, the wheelchair rugby is very different from the rugby asset, because it's not the same ball, there's a wheelchair, etc. So we have some differences, but most of the time we succeed to do a common pictograms for Olympics and Paralympics.
Keeping this consistency in branding ensures a continuity of graphic identity on backgrounds, which is very important for viewers tuning in from around the world. But this reuse is also financially savvy too. It means a reduction in the amount of rebranding of venues and spaces for the Paralympic Games. The hoarding, banners and signage across the city need only a small tweak.
Regarding signage, it's the first time in history that you can see a new brand block that has been created. You have all of the Olympic and Paralympic sign, plus Paris 2024 in the middle, which means that we didn't have to change the signage. We just have to stick and replace some of the elements that are different from venues on one or other events.
One character that has captured the hearts of many at the Paris 2024 Games is the official mascot. Now, these are usually entirely different characters for the Olympic and Paralympic Games. But this year's mascot carries across both events, the red triangular frige. It's a nod to the Phrygian cap, an emblematic accessory of French revolutionaries. The Olympic model, Ollie, and its counterpart, Para, are nearly identical, bar one visible difference.
The mascots are the same. They are not animal, they are not human, they are gender neutral as well. But you can see on Frige Para a visible disability, which is new as well.
And it's this difference that has proved popular, especially when it came to plush toys.
When the mascots were launched, Para was out of stock before Ollie, so it was a huge success for us, and it helps children to have discussion with them around disability and showing that everybody are the same and that we can talk about it. We had a huge program in France around that, and the mascot was key for those discussions.
So as the French capital gears up for another round of elite sports, don't be surprised if it all looks rather familiar. For Monocle, I'm Ailey Evans.
You are listening to the Curator on Monocle Radio, from one big event to another. Next year's edition of the Eurovision Song Contest will be held in the Swiss city of Basel. The decision was announced today by the public broadcaster SRG, with Basel beating competition from Geneva. Monocle's editorial director Tyler Brûlé and me spoke about the decision and a little bit more about Swiss hospitality.
I went to hell and back to find myself on track. I broke the code, whoa, like the night.
That is The Code, sung by Nemo, who won the 68th Eurovision Song Contest last year. They were representing Switzerland, so this year the competition will be hosted in the country, and there's been much speculation about exactly where, with Geneva, Zurich and Basel all strong contenders. Well, this morning it was announced that Basel will be the host. Well, I'm joined now by our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, and our Eurovision correspondent, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Hello to you both. Tyler, where do we find you today?
Bonjour, I'm in Paris, Georgina, and it's really an interesting announcement, interesting time, interesting that I'm also in Paris because this was really a huge story in Switzerland. Of course, the fact that Switzerland will be hosting Eurovision in 2025, that the fact that, of course, the country made it through, so much excitement around that. But then this became really a competition in its own right between the three biggest cities, the three hubs of the country. And some weeks ago, Zurich backed out. We were very disappointed because we thought how fantastic, of course, having our substantial setup in Zurich. It would have been great. Yes, indeed, Eurovision would have been right on our doorstep. Now it's not far away with this Basel announcement. But I think here's the interesting bit. Zurich backed out because they thought it was simply going to be too much money, and there's been a lot of discussion around the funding for the state public broadcaster. So that called a few things into question. But I think it's interesting because here I am in Paris, which is going to be soon hosting Paris Art Basel. And so there's a lot of discussion. Will actually Art Basel eventually just be in Paris? So it's very interesting that Basel has sort of jumped at an opportunity to host another big event when there's some question marks about whether it has a future in the art space.
I mean, what does Basel bring to the table in terms of the city itself?
Well, I think there's a few things. It is used to hosting major events, not events of this scale. But if you think back to, of course, the Basel Watch Fair was really one of it. This is another thing the city has lost as well, Georgina. So the world used to come to Basel every single year for the most important watch show on the calendar. That has now changed. That has migrated to Geneva, and Geneva is host to Watches and Wonders. So I would say that the first big loss, obviously, has been that. Now we know Eurovision is not an annual competition unless you've got it's an annual competition, but it always moves around. But I think that this is also probably going to be a moment for the city to say, we're reasonably well connected when it comes to aviation. There's quite a solid airport. You can fly in from all over Europe. Long haul, of course, is really Zurich. But here's the thing. It's almost like going across London. The distance between Zurich and Basel might be significant. But of course, the rail gets you there in less than an hour. I mean, you can probably do Basel, Zurich in 50 minutes.
Let me just bring in Fernando now. Fernando, Switzerland actually won the very first Eurovision.
Yes, I mean, it is considered the birthplace of Eurovision. They hosted in Lugano back in 1956. And I was thinking about it. I'm not sure if Tyler would agree with me. So they hosted twice, in Lugano and in Lausanne in 1989. So German Switzerland never actually hosted Eurovision. So I wonder, of course, you have to see which city, has the better plan. I mean, the better ambitions for such a big event like this. But I think it's quite important that a city like Basel should host as well. Funny, I actually, for a moment, I thought it was going to be Geneva, but then I think Basel got the crowd at the last minute.
But I mean, Tyler, of course, this is a good thing for the country as a whole. What will it do in terms of soft power status?
I think this is a huge moment for Switzerland to step up. Of course, you have Basel, a city which really also plays on its it's really a tri-nation city because you can travel on the tram and cross into France, and you can cross into Germany. And of course, the city has amazing art and design credentials. You have, of course, the Basel Foundation is there, probably one of the best art museums in Europe. Vitra, of course, it's home to one of the best design companies in Europe. And then at the same time, it's a global pharma hub. When you think, why do we think of Basel? Well, oftentimes, if you're going to look on a pill pack or something, you'll notice the name Novartis or Roche. And of course, those are two of the world's biggest players in pharmaceuticals. And they're significant players, and not just in a business space, but also huge contributors to art, design, and culture through their initiatives as well. So I think that this is an opportunity for, of course, Switzerland to chalk up all of its attributes, and also show that this is a nation which hosts some of the best collections in art around the world. So I think this is really a chance for the country. I think to perhaps change the narrative that it's a bit of a sleepy place, but also it already did that. Of course, with Nemo's win this year.
I mean, talking about its successes in those other areas, is it known to be, Basel in particular, Fernando, known to be successful in music?
Well, I was doing some research. I mean, of course, with art, it's undeniable that Basel has its influence. But I was looking at music. I mean, To be honest, DJ Antoine is from there. He's one of the most successful Swiss artists of all time. I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm the biggest fan. He had massive hits, Welcome to Saint-Tropez. There's a Swiss rock band called Love Bugs as well. But I think it's a great opportunity, to show them off. And I was looking at the Basler Zeitung, the regional paper from Basel. They're very excited. It's been reported that there's been tears of joy in the newsroom. So it's a big deal, to host an event like this.
I know that you are certainly going to be there at Eurovision in Basel. And as you do every year, you'll be partying at the Euro Club. Tyler, will you be joining him?
I don't know. I have to see if my train pass gets me that far. But I do think, Georgina, we're definitely going to have a lead-in weekend. The same thing happens also with Art Basel. A lot of things also happen in Zurich. And of course, from a hotel capacity, I think a lot of people will be staying in Zurich and, of course, shuttling into Basel. So I think that the party is going to stretch to both cities.
I have a question for you. How do music producers make music feel cinematic? Well, music producer Oscar Oseki realized the power of orchestral music when he first saw the proms at the Royal Albert Hall and has been bringing cinematic-style orchestral music to the masses ever since. Since studying music and conducting, Oscar has composed music for dozens of venues, festivals and productions, including the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. and the BBC Radio 4 drama Requiem. He now works with artists from the UK, India, Sweden, the US, and Argentina to bring their music to life for TV and film. Georgina Godwin spoke to Oscar on Monocle on Saturday. She began by asking him where his passion for orchestral music began.
I found myself being obsessed with the orchestra around the age of 15, and I wanted to share that with people really desperately. And I found that most of my peers didn't care. It's not trendy to be into orchestral music. And I started a YouTube channel to show people. I thought people don't know what they're missing, and I want to show them what's out there, what this world means to me. And the YouTube channel really took off and did extremely well. And since then, especially since COVID, I started creating orchestral music which collaborates with pop artists. So orchestra for pop, not unlike the James Bond songs, for example. And I was overwhelmed by how many pop artists or crossover artists wanted orchestra. And I think they want it because it's such an expressive medium. It can tell a story and it can put you in a scene, almost like a film scene, in a way that other genres perhaps couldn't do so vividly.
And could we hear an example? I think this is called Videotape Part 1.
Yeah, right. Well, it's clip 1 from Videotape. Yeah, the song is Videotape. And this first part that we'll hear, it's a classical crossover duo based in London. They're called the Intesa Duo. And they both play viola da gambas, which are sort of grandfathers of the cello. And one of them, Lucine, sings beautifully. And in this clip, the orchestra allows for this moment where the emotions sort of overwhelm you, and it gradually washes over and it subsumes the viola da gambas, sort of wringing out emotion. And, without the orchestra, this was just for solo gambas and voice. But with the orchestra, it allows for a much stronger emotional arc and journey.
Let's listen. I see exactly what you mean. It is very emotional, isn't it? And tell us more now about how your music, or how music generally, can take us from one extreme to the other. And I know you have another clip that actually shows us that.
Well, yeah, exactly. So the orchestra is a very dynamic instrument, if you want to call it that. It can go incredibly loud and powerful, and obviously you can also have the quietest, most cathartic experiences. And so at the end of this song, Videotape, you see how we go from one extreme to the other, from intense emotional journey to a sort of cathartic release, as she reflects on serene blissfulness or a gratitude for life after the struggle. And it's a sense of journey from different extremes that you can have with this music.
Because I know today has been the most perfect day I've ever seen.
beautiful, really beautiful.
Thank you.
I wonder if you could discuss the idea of how music can paint a scene.
Well, I think we're used to music painting scenes from film music, from great scores of the last 100 years almost. And we're used to this idea of being put in a scene. And music, if you ever watch film without music, that's meant to have music in it, you really sense that something's missing, that something is not putting us properly in the scene. And so, for example, I collaborated with a pop singer, Chloe Edgecombe, who was, she was one of the 3 finalists in Got Talent Argentina, which is their Simon Cowell sort of venture. And she was writing a song with a very desolate story. It was a refugee story, really. And the benefit of a film orchestra there was that it painted a filmic scene. Because I think pop lyrics often have a simple and direct storytelling nature to them. And when you pair this with the storytelling of film music, I think it's a very potent recipe for painting a scene, for putting the listener into a scene.
Let's listen. Gosh, amazing voice, isn't she?
Spine-shivering voice, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's also this sense that it can take you, it takes you from one emotional place to a completely different place, and that's just by the cleverness of the composition.
Well, it's perhaps. Oh well, you flatter me. But it's really again this sense of dynamic potential, which is just magnified by having a sort of 80-piece orchestra rather than a 4-piece band or something. So at the end of this song, Hope, with her voice, it goes from desolation to a sense of rage or almost violent anger. Just a verse later, but the orchestra allows for that magnitude of escalation.
Let's listen.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
We're back with The Curator. The pop-up exhibition at the South London Gallery asks designer and artist to reinterpret the traditional birdhouse. Designer and exhibit curator Andu Masebo, along with creative director Oli Olanipekun, share more about the project.
Grey heron stalking its prey, but usually it'll just sit and wait for up to 3 hours, waiting to see any movement, maybe rodents, snakes. Right now it seems to be staring at the Canada geese and the carrion crow. My name is Oli Olanipekun. I'm a creative director based in London. I'm co-founder of the birdwatching collective Flock Together, started by myself and Nadine Pereira in 2020, and also the founder of the new platform Open Area, where we use art and creativity to reconnect people with nature.
We wanted a really diverse spread of practices that meant that you could go into this space and be stimulated on lots of different levels. My name's Andu Masebo. I'm a product design and furniture maker, and I also am part of a collective design studio called Computer Room. We had all of these friends that we knew we wanted to have in a room on a common theme, and we felt that the birdhouse was a really nice connector because it both brings a common context to all of the artists, but it also taps into so much of what Flock are talking about. It gives different entry points of quite simple, functional birdhouses to really deep conceptual dissections of what it means to build a house for a bird and why we've got to a point where we need to build houses for birds.
It was really important that this was delivered as a group show because there's so many different access points for people into nature. All of the people that attend Flock Together, they all have different perspectives and different interests. What I'm about now as a creative is really exploring these different access points, because when you see nature through someone else's lens is an opportunity to give you confidence to be like, you know what, I am a nature guy. Because for so long we've boxed nature into this small space where you have to know this, you have to wear that, you have to go to these types of places. So yeah, the group show approach was really important to me, and Andu's executed that incredibly well.
The kind of like seed of the idea was kind of set by Flock Together. The ways that people have run with that idea, incredible to see how people can take it in so many different ways that you could never expect it to go. There's such a vast range of approaches. Jesse Butterfield's work, where he's made kind of metropolis of birdhouses that relate to a specific bird that co-nests, one of the only birds that lives in tandem with other birds. Someone like Benedict Brinks, who has done a really poetic, meaningful photo series that relate to quite a human connection to the idea of fleeting ideas of home. There's a kind of whole range of material, aesthetic sensibilities, conceptual work that deconstructs what it means to make a birdhouse. A friend of ours called Babek, he's planted seeds effectively in order to ask the question, why are humans needed in the conversation about housing birds? So he's kind of made a provocative gesture towards the concept. There's this kind of like range between conceptual, functional, different material sensibilities, different ideological positions. I hope that people enter the space and are challenged by the concept of what a birdhouse can be, and that they have to actually spend a lot of time with each of these objects to make sense of how they relate to each other. If that happens, then
incredible.
We succeeded.
You've got the herring gull next to it.
London pigeon.
Classic. It's actually a wood pigeon, which is a controversial bird, divisive bird. People call it the flying rats. We domesticated them and then we gave them up. So I do sympathise with their plight, but also I do find them quite disgusting.
When I initially had a conversation with Ollie, I was excited to do exactly this, to walk around and hear some of his knowledge and be inspired, and then almost be naive in my position as a designer to find the midpoint between those two positions.
There's studies that have gone into the best materials, but I think a lot of people in their traditional mind see it as that B&Q shed, that wooden structure. Do we unpack where that came from and how that became the go-to for the design approach?
Creativity in its best sense is a really fine balance between like a naivety and knowledge. Sometimes if you have too much knowledge on a space, you can be stifled from like creative expression. If I was like super well read up on all of the requirements of birds and the stipulations by governments of what a birdhouse needs to be and all of the different regions that it might go to, it suddenly narrows what a birdhouse can be into this green plastic or wood container that has a hole this size and has a hook that size. That's, to me, not very interesting.
This like naive approach, we are so fixed on not getting things wrong that it limits the space to explore and experiment. And surely when we talk about innovation, you can only innovate when you experiment. No one's expecting you to have all the answers, but what if you do unlock something, inspire someone to then go and do something that has that chain reaction?
You can expand the borders of what's imagined. Sometimes we need to not have solutions that are just quite moderate, practical steps towards a slightly better future. And we need to like suspend disbelief and be naive and just imagine, what if there was no gravity? We were on a different planet. Birds were a different size. We didn't put any limitations on anyone. We intentionally wanted a really broad range of functional to conceptual, mind-expanding notions of what this space can be.
And now a highlight from my show, The Stack. I had the pleasure to speak with Monocle's creative director, Richard Spencer Powell, about Monocle's September issue and the beautiful cover too.
It's caused a bit of a stir in the office, actually, the cover, in a good way. I've had lots of people come up to my desk and email me and compliment me on the cover. So that's normally, anecdotally, that's normally a good sign. We hope the public has the same response. But internally, it's been very successful. And I noticed on my way into the studio just now that at the front of desk, we have, as you know, we have a nice olive UBS unit, and we keep the out-facing covers on there. And I asked Millie on front of house, how come the new issue's been stacked too deep? And she said it's because so many people keep taking them that the display keeps getting emptied too frequently. So she's had to double stock it. But it's a very good, I say it's a very good cover. I'm very happy with the cover.
And I think it shows well in the newsstand. I was in Soho yesterday and I was like, very easy to spot. I like the color of the jumper of the model. We know the model a little bit, right? Especially you, right, Rich?
Yes, he's a very nice gentleman from Kyoto, I believe, named Taka. He's also an actor and he's modelled for us 5 or 6 times now. And in fact, he's been on a previous cover. But I think what marks the difference for this cover is that we've been very singular. As you know, Monocle is quite a complicated brand in the fact that we have lots of sections and we pack it forward with affairs and business and culture and design and travel and fashion. And often on the cover, you have to try and show as many of those facets as possible. So often we've been in a kind of composite world, or we might have a theme, but we also want to show our core pillars, as it were. So our covers can be complicated. And that's traditionally been the challenge that I've faced, is trying to simplify all the information and all the messages that we want to convey on the newsstand. But this time out, we just decided to be a little cleaner, and we've just got one headline, one cover line, and a little cell line and one image. And I think it's that clarity that people have responded to. And obviously when you go from being quite complicated to quite simple, it feels bold and it feels very new. In fact, lots of people have said to me, oh, they like the redesign. But actually, it's not redesigned.
We need to be clear here.
Yeah, be very clear. There's nothing new there, actually. It's just a slightly new approach, and it feels very new. But that point size, we've used it before. We've used the model before, and there's no actual design change to the structure of the actual cover design.
And how inviting as well. Where next? I mean, this is such a powerful kind of phrase in a way.
It is, and I think, I've been lucky in my career that I've managed to travel quite a lot, and especially if you're doing something long haul or going somewhere new, there's always that moment when you're sat on the train or you're sat in the lounge or you're sat on your seat about to take off and you're a bit hopeful, you're kind of excited about where you're going, maybe you're returning somewhere that you really love. I always think travelling for work is a real privilege. Even though it's work, it's about Tyler mentioned something to me a long, long time ago where he said travel is about thirst for knowledge, and I think he's absolutely right. So I think that cover is quite hopeful, and even though the model has his hand on his chin and he's quite pensive, I like to think he's thinking about what may be.
That's a very good one. And Rich, let's talk about some other aspects. At the mobility special inside the magazine, I love the kind of stripy line, kind of white and red. That's a really good touch to it as well, and it makes it kind of very special. This is our special inside the magazine, right?
Yeah, well, I think, the chevrons, I think they just say travel, I think, more than any other sort of graphic symbol. And so we wanted to employ chevron. It's something we've been using over the years, but we just decided to go a bit more colourful with the blue and the red. It's a little bit airmail maybe, but it's bold. And when you look at the foredge of the magazine, which is the opposite edge of the spine, you can see the colour. It brands it a little bit and the reader can flick straight to it. So it just elevates it a little bit away from the other pages. And again, the editors have done a great job. It's packed full of really good stories.
Do you have a favorite one? I mean, I do love the illustrations of the small cars. There's a little article about some small cars around the world. I mean, this is super sweet.
It is dead cute. And I mean, not just the car designs, but I just think the way it's done, the consistency of side profile, and you realise how many micro cars are out there, which I think is a bit of an eye-opener. In terms of stories, I absolutely love the fashion story from where the cover image has come. Great photographer, Fritz, who...
Strong.
He's just very creative, shoots from the hip. And when I was going through, I just saw that image and just saw the cover. It was it's just a moment. And I think when you know, it's a little bit like falling in love somehow. But then I also like this incredible expo story, which isn't transport related, but it's about this, I think it's Lithuanian choir conference or ceremony, and where all these choirs come together. And it's what expo is meant to be. It's glorious, it's epic. You've never seen it. No one else has done it. We're using a new heavier weight gloss stock for this issue and the last. And it just absolutely sings. It's just, yeah, you want to, I can't wait to put it into frame it and put it on the wall or make a poster. But it's a real strong end to what I think is a very nice issue and return to autumn newsstands.
Rich, just finally, are you excited by the second half of the year? Because I'm sure we have a lot of plans, for the brand, new issues and specials and all sorts of things.
I am. I'm just back from my holiday in Menorca, and it feels a little bit of a distant memory because we're straight into a production week for our next issue of Confect. But I always like summer at Monocle because I think we celebrate the sun and optimism, but I also like winter as well because Tyler's such a festive fan and I am too. And it's kind of like the business end of the year. It gets very, very busy. There's normally a little bit of spare sort of marketing money around, so there's a little bit more advertising work to do. And it just all piles on, and it's just like that race to the end of the year. It's quite buzzy, and I am looking forward to it. And there is a lot to do, so kind of watch this space.
We are back with The Curator, a weekly highlight show here in Monocle. And now a highlight from the menu. Cynthia Shanmugalingam joins us in the studio to talk about her restaurant, Rambutan, in London, and discusses the importance of sharing memories and experiences through food.
I guess this sort of journey started for me when I've always loved food and come from a big Asian family. We all are obsessed with food. But Sri Lanka had a long civil war, and it meant, I'm Tamil, I'm from the north of the island, which was the most badly affected by the war. And it meant that we couldn't go home to where our parents grew up and had their ancestral home for about 30 years for the duration of the war. And I went back after the war ended in 2012 with my mum and dad, and I had never been to the house that they grew up in the village. And I was kind of like, Mum is cooking on fire. She's got skills that I didn't know she had. All of those village kitchens, most of them, unless you're super wealthy, most of them still cook on firewood. So there's this smokiness and fire burning in the kitchen. And you go to the market and buy fish and seafood directly from the fishermen. It's a rural area, so there's vegetables growing in the garden or people bringing you coconuts and whatever. And when you make food in that old-fashioned way, it's so delicious. And I felt this kind of rural, rustic Sri Lankan cookery was so exciting, and no one was really doing it in London. And that was the beginning of the idea. And it's taken me a long time because I'm kind of on my own. I'm a solo female entrepreneur, and I don't come from a background of restaurants or from money. So it took me a long time to raise the money and get started and find the site and so on. But I guess all along, this idea of having it be a kind of modern London representation of that same ethos. So we cook on charcoal in the restaurant, so the fires are burning when you come into the restaurant. It feels quite exciting when you walk into the space. We use dayboat fish and sustainable seasonal ingredients, so cooking according to how the world is moving and changing. Plating in a very simple but beautiful way, so not blobs and gels and chefy things that don't work for me in what I think is cool in food. And kind of a modernist space, so a space that celebrates a proudly independent post-colonial Sri Lanka that references the post-colonial architects of Sri Lanka, and that represents, I guess, me as a hybrid of both London and Sri Lanka. And I talk a lot about Rambutan as being a diaspora restaurant that represents kind of two communities in that way.
How much of you personally is there in the recipes as well, of your own memories, but also your own take, given the fact that you do have this split identity?
Yeah, lots. I would say it feels like a very personal project. So, if someone doesn't like something, it also feels very personal as well. And I feel like there are recipes in the restaurant that are cooked at homes in Sri Lanka that I've never seen on a restaurant before. We've just got this medicine fish curry on at the moment, which is sea bass. We grill it and then we make a fish curry it's heavy on turmeric, coriander, fennel, cumin, and it's a curry for when you're not feeling well. Which we thought would be good because we've had such a changeable summer, and we everyone seems to be getting ill because it goes from hot to cold. And that curry is based on a traditional curry called Serika curry. And it's like, I've never seen it on any restaurant menus. Your mum just makes it when you're feeling ill or when someone's just had a baby. That's when you have it. Chicken pongal, which is maybe like our biggest selling dish and has been on the menu since the beginning, is like rice cooked in coconut milk. It's kind of like almost like a risotto with chicken and lots of delicious spices. And that, again, I've never seen on a menu before. So lots of it is about, memories or hand-me-down recipes that I got from mum and from the aunties. And then also from travelling around the island as an adult and meeting people from all different kinds of communities in Sri Lanka. And it's important that we have a little bit of a twist on recipes, and sometimes with something playful, like we had a fried chicken sandwich on, and we now got a fried squid sandwich on. It's a version of a fried squid, like bar snack in Colombo, but it's our own spin on it, and we put it in a sandwich, and we made some mayo, and we had a bit of fun with it. And it's important that it has this playful quality and that it represents the kind of London side. I think I'm growing in confidence in kind of exploring that side also as time goes on.
In London, you can feasibly find almost any cuisine in the world at the moment, but I think there is a trick to representing a cuisine in a different, new way. You were talking about that with Rambutan and the approach that you have. I wonder also if there is a specificity geographically also within Sri Lanka, because we tend to label things as, oh, this is Sri Lankan, but surely the island itself will have a diversity of cuisines within it. Your family's from the north.
Yeah.
So is there a specific difference between northern Sri Lankan cuisine and southern and coastal and non-coastal? Yeah. And what are you trying to represent?
Yeah, so I would say that I say that we've got a special focus on the dishes from the north of the island, from the Tamil side of the island. My parents are from very close to Point Pedro, which is the northernmost tip. It's the John O'Groats of Sri Lanka. And it's coastal and it's close to these lagoons, large lagoons that have shallow water, which is amazing for crab and crustaceans. So they have lots of amazing like crab, and actually all of the crab in Singapore that like Singapore chili crab is all exported from the north of Sri Lanka. It all comes from Sri Lanka. So it's like incredible kind of export quality. And the north of the island it's 27 kilometers from the south of India. So there's like so many parallels and crossovers that are quite ancient. So we cook dosas, these fermented pancakes up in the north of the island. It's considered to be the spiciest food, like the most kind of chili heavy. We use tamarind in our fish curries, which they don't do in the south. But then even within the north, there are different communities. Some people are very religious and very Hindu, so they'll be vegetarian. Christian and Muslim communities will eat beef curries, and they're super delicious. And then as you go further south, the majority of Sri Lanka is Sinhalese, which is another ethnic group. And Sinhalese, hill country, coastal region. From the very south, they all have their own regional specialities and differences. So actually, for a small island, it's packed with lots of different regional flavour.
And for Tall Stories this week, Gregory Scruggs takes us to a non-denominational chapel that has been a spiritual sanctuary and design lovers' dream for decades.
Step inside the Rothko Chapel, and you get more than just a respite from the stifling Houston heat. You get the precious experience of silence and stillness, something increasingly rare in the modern era. You get a moment of contemplation, perhaps to connect with a force greater than yourself. That at least was the hope of philanthropists and art patrons Dominique and John de Menil, the French-American couple who wanted to create a sacred space in their adopted hometown. The de Menils were enamored of how post-war France infused religious buildings with contemporary art and architecture, from Henri Matisse's Chapel of the Rosary to Le Corbusier's Notre-Dame du Haut. And they were inspired by the Catholic Church's liberalizing tendencies during the Second Vatican Council. So in 1964, they commissioned American abstract expressionist painter Mark Rothko to create a chapel, a thoroughly modern artist tasked with channeling an ancient yearning for divine encounter. Rothko, famous for his color-filled paintings, eventually prepared 14 canvases that are the chapel's centerpiece. Half feature hard-edged, black rectangles on maroon ground, and the other half varying shades of purple tones. But they didn't come easy for the tortured artist. Rothko wrote to the de Menils in 1966, quote, The magnitude on every level of experience and meaning of the task in which you have involved me exceeds all of my preconceptions, and it is teaching me to extend myself beyond what I thought was possible for me. While the painter struggled internally, he lashed out externally. Rothko clashed with the chapel's original architect, Philip Johnson of Glass House fame, and cycled through two more. Rothko committed suicide in 1970, a year before the chapel was finally completed and open to the public. While Rothko himself never had the chance to appreciate his masterpieces in their intended setting, today over 100,000 visitors from around the world make the pilgrimage annually, whether modern art aficionados or spiritual seekers. I went myself earlier this year for the second time. The space hushes visitors instinctively, to the point where even a whisper feels too loud. Your sight, too, quiets down. The visual noise of the outside world fades away as you slowly perceive the subtle tones of Rothko's color choices. It takes at least 15 minutes inside for your eyes to adjust, and as the natural lighting changes with the clouds and time of day, the same painting takes on a different hue. Sadly, the chapel suffered extensive damage on the 9th of July from Hurricane Beryl. Water leaked through the roof following heavy rain and gale force winds, damaging 3 of the Rothko panels. In August, the chapel's leadership announced that the space will be closed indefinitely, while Witten and Proctor Fine Art Conservation repair the paintings. Eventually, the chapel will reopen, and once again, visitors will have the chance to open the heavy doors, select from an assortment of holy books covering all the world's major faiths, kneel on a cushion or sit on a bench in front of a Rothko triptych, and see for themselves how modern art can spark an encounter with the divine. As Dominique DeMille said, the Rothko chapel is oriented towards the sacred, and yet it imposes no traditional environment. It offers a place where a common orientation could be found, an orientation towards God, named or unnamed, an orientation towards the highest aspirations of man and the most intimate calls of the conscience.
And finally on the show, we explore the new film Sing Sing on Monocle Culture. The film follows a group of incarcerated men taking part in their rehabilitation through the Arts Theatre program at a notorious prison. Robert Bound spoke to the director Greg Quedar to find out more about the making of the extraordinary film.
This is a clemency hearing for your conviction, 25 to life. Since you've been in custody, you've been involved in the theater program.
Gentlemen, let's go. It's been a program that was established to help people get more in touch with their feelings and truly get some rehabilitation.
I am Gladiator Goliath. I am Spartacus. I'm Prince Hamlet of Denmark.
And it's turned into something of, wonderful.
What part do you play?
From time to time I do act, like we all do.
So are you acting at all during this interview?
A little taste of Sing Sing there, and here in the studio, I began by asking Greg when he first heard about some of the success stories which came out of the Rehabilitation Through the Arts program.
I came across this story quite unexpectedly over 8 years ago. I was producing a short documentary inside of a maximum security prison in Kansas, and it was my first time ever behind the walls. Mm-hmm. We were, about something else, but on a tour of the facility, I passed by a cell, and there was a young man raising a rescue dog inside of his cell, and it just stopped me in my tracks. I think first and foremost because it completely upended all of my expectations of prison and incarcerated people, largely built on the movies that I grew up watching. Yeah. But yet inside of the cell was something that was going completely against that current. Mm-hmm. And what I was witnessing was healing that was happening in both directions between this man and this animal. And so I was, I felt like the compassion there And I was also frustrated at the same time, you know, because my own industry had sort of propped up a lot of things that sort of was painting a different picture. Mm-hmm. And so that night in the hotel room, I was just very desperate to know, was there anyone else out there doing things differently? And I typed that literally into Google, who is doing things differently in prison. And near the top of the search field was this program.
It's refreshingly honest.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Every once in a while, and this is, I'm not sponsored by Google in any way, but near the top of the search field was this program in New York, Rehabilitation Through the Arts, RTA. And they had been around since 1996 at Sing Sing. They had been putting on plays there ever since. They had done all the classics. They'd been covering a lot of the major press. But there was this article in Esquire from 2005 production of a time-traveling musical comedy called Breaking the Mummy's Code that just grabbed me.
And this, by the way, is the production that
it's in the movie,
that the inmates put on in the film.
Yeah.
And it's an odd choice, you know, where they start off with a bit of Midsummer Night's Dream, maybe a bit of King Lear, whatever it might be, right. And they do this mashup thing, which is very powerful in the end.
And there was just this desire to shake things up, and the way one of our characters in the film, Clarence Divine Eye Macklin, says is like, every day we're dealing with drama. Every day there's tragedy. It's like, I think population just might appreciate a comedy, you know, and then that unlocks this sort of feeling in the room where everyone starts just throwing stuff at the wall of like, I want a little bit of Freddy Krueger, and I want a little bit of Sherwood Forest, and like maybe Peter Pan and this and that, you know, and pirates. And so Brent took that and he wrote all of that into one play, and the only way to get through it was time travel to cover all that ground.
Yeah, and there's obviously there's that crazy breadth and depth that this play covers, and then there's obviously the huge journeys, time travel or otherwise. And I thought time travel was an interesting idea because it's what perhaps a lot of people in prison would like to be able to do to turn back the clock. There's always that kind of notion, a little bit like a swinging pendulum in this film as well, isn't there?
And within that, I mean, I think people experience time incarcerated in very unique ways, and you know, most specifically, there is slow time and there is fast time. You know, slow time is like, feels like it's just melting forward, and a lot of men, you know, kind of, you know, break the battery in their watch so that they don't have to look at the seconds going by, you know. And then there's fast time, and that's the time that you could actually wish you could slow down. And I think the only time probably incarcerated you experience that is when you have access to something as liberating as the artistic process of putting these shows on. You know, and for 6 months, you know, you get to hurtle through with your friends to kind of conjure up these imaginary places and stories, and those walls kind of melt away. And then at the end of those 6 months, you put that show on, and backstage you're counted once again, you're putting these greens back on, and you go back to your cell, and the slow time begins again until you start getting a new production on its feet.
And that's all we've got time for this week's edition of The Curator. The show was produced by David Stevens and presented by me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Join us again next week, and thank you very much for listening.